Captain John Mitchell stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance and watched the stars drift past through the main viewing screen. The human exploration vessel moved through space like a small fish in an endless ocean, its hull gleaming under the sea. Light of distant suns. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with the quiet efficiency that came from years of service together. Chief Engineer Maria Santos monitored the engine readings from her console, while Navigator Alex Carter plotted their course through the Outer Rim territories. Dr. Lisa Brown, the ship's medical officer, reviewed supply reports at her station. Near the back of the bridge, the year was 2387, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Federation for nearly 2 centuries. It had been a long road from that first contact in 2195, when the Veltar Empire discovered Earth and offered humanity a place among the stars. Back then, humans had been so excited to learn they were not alone in the universe. They had eagerly accepted the Federation's terms and began the slow process of integrating into galactic society. Now, after all these years, humans served throughout the galaxy as soldiers, miners, colonists, and explorers. They were known for their ability to adapt to harsh conditions and their refusal to give up even when facing impossible odds. Other species respected these qualities, but they also saw humans as expendable workers who could be sent to dangerous places where more valuable species would not risk their lives. The Galactic Council Chamber on the capital world of Zentara Prime buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of species gathered for their monthly session. The massive circular chamber was designed to accommodate beings of all shapes and sizes, from the towering crystalline Zephyrians to the small, tentacled Aquarians. At the center of it all sat the ruling council, dominated by the ancient Veltar Empire and the technologically superior Zephyrian Collective. Admiral Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking human in the Federation military, sat in the section reserved for minor species representatives. Her uniform bore the insignia of the Federation Navy, but she knew that her opinions carried little weight in these discussions. Humans were considered useful, but not particularly intelligent compared to the major galactic powers. They were excluded from important decisions and treated more like valuable tools than equal partners. The current discussion centered on a newly discovered system called Kepler 442. System contained 7 planets rich in rare minerals and energy sources that the major species needed for their advanced technologies. The inner worlds were particularly valuable, with deposits of quantum crystals and other materials that could power entire civilizations for centuries. The Veltar counselor, an elderly being with gray skin and large black eyes, spoke in the clicking language of his people. A translation device converted his words into the common galactic tongue. The system presents both opportunity and danger, he said, his voice carrying the authority of millennia. Our deep space sensors have detected movement in the void beyond Kepler 442. The Kethmori swarm approaches. A ripple of concern passed through the chamber. The Kethmori were a nightmare from the dark spaces between stars, insectoid creatures that consumed everything in their path. They had destroyed entire civilizations before disappearing back into the void for decades at a time. No one knew when or where they would strike next. The Zephyrian representative, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline form, pulsed with light as it communicated. The Kethmori cannot be allowed to claim the Kepler 442 system. The resources there are too valuable to lose. Other counselors nodded in agreement. The rare materials in Kepler 442 were essential for maintaining their advanced societies. Without them, their technology would stagnate and their civilizations would begin to decline. The Veltar counselor continued his presentation. We have developed a strategy to protect the system while minimizing risk to our primary populations. Human colonies will be established on the outer planets of Kepler 442. If the Kethmori attack, these settlements will provide early warning and slow their advance while our main forces prepare defensive positions around the valuable inner worlds. Admiral Haz felt her blood run cold. She stood slowly, her human form dwarfed by the massive chamber around her. Counselor, with respect, what you are describing is using human civilians as shields. The Federation Charter specifically prohibits. The Federation Charter, the Veltar interrupted, provides for necessary sacrifices in times of galactic crisis. Humans have always excelled at survival in hostile environments. This is simply an extension of your natural abilities. Other counselors murmured their agreement. The Aquarian representative waved a tentacle dismissively. Humans should be grateful for the opportunity to serve the greater good. Your species has always been eager to prove its worth to the Federation. Admiral Hayes felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. The colonists you are sending to die are families, children, people who trust the Federation. To protect them, they are not disposable. The Veltar counselor's expression did not change. Every species makes sacrifices for the survival of galactic civilization. Humans have been given worlds to inhabit, technology to advance their society, and protection from external threats. In return, you serve where you are needed most. The vote was swift and decisive. The major species voted unanimously to proceed with the colonization plan. The minor species, intimidated by the power of the Council, abstained or voted in favor. Only Admiral Hayes voted against the proposal, her lone voice lost in the vast chamber dot as the session ended. The Veltar counselor approached her. Admiral, you will implement this colonization immediately. Earth and the human colonies will provide the necessary ships and personnel. Any delay will be considered an act of defiance against the Federation. Admiral Hayes saluted stiffly. Understood, Counselor. I will carry out my orders. But as she left the chamber, her mind was already working on the implications of what she had just heard. The Federation was sending millions of human colonists to die, and they expected her to help make it happen. For the first time in her long career, she began to question whether humanity's loyalty to the Federation was being returned in kind. On Earth, President William Jackson received the Council's directive in his office, overlooking the rebuilt cities of the home world. The message was clear and direct. Humanity was to provide colonists for the Kepler 442 system immediately. The reasons given were vague, but the timeline was not. The first ships were to launch within 6 months. Jackson stared out at the bustling streets below, where humans went about their daily lives, unaware that their government was about to send millions of their people to almost certain death. He had served in the Federation military himself before entering politics, and he knew that sometimes difficult decisions had to be made for the greater good. But this felt different. This felt like betrayal. Despite his reservations, Jackson knew that humanity lacked the political or military power to refuse the Council's orders. The human worlds were scattered across dozens of systems, each one dependent on Federation trade and protection. To defy the Council would mean isolation and eventual destruction by hostile forces. The preparation began immediately. Colony ships were pulled from storage and refitted for the long journey to Kepler 442. Recruitment centers opened on every human world, seeking volunteers for what was being advertised as humanity's greatest expansion into unexplored space. The response was overwhelming as humans eagerly signed up for the chance to build new worlds and expand their civilization. None of them knew they were being sent to die. The Kepler 442 system hummed with human activity as massive colony ships arrived one after another, their cargo holds filled with everything needed to build new worlds. Transport Captain Kevin Miller guided his vessel through the crowded shipping lanes, watching as construction crews worked around the clock to establish settlements on 5 of the system's outer planets. The sight filled him with pride, seeing humanity spreading across the stars like this. But something nagged at him about the whole operation. The colonists themselves were full of hope and determination. Families like the Johnsons had sold everything they owned back on Earth to join this venture, bringing their 3 children to help build what they believed would be a shining example of human achievement. The Garcia family had come from the mining colonies of Alpha Centauri, seeking a fresh start on a world where they could farm instead of digging in the deep tunnels. Thousands of similar stories played out across the settlements as people worked to turn barren worlds into homes. Dr. Amanda Foster stood in her makeshift laboratory on Kepler 442d, studying soil samples and atmospheric readings. As a xenobiologist, she had volunteered for the mission, specifically to study the unique ecosystems they expected to find in this unexplored system. What she found instead troubled her deeply. The planets showed signs of recent geological activity that did not match their age, and the outer asteroid belt contained materials that seemed to have been processed by some unknown technology. Her research partner, geologist Dr. Ryan Cooper, shared her concerns. He had discovered mining scars on several asteroids that were too precise to be natural formations. The patterns suggested systematic extraction by beings with advanced technology, but the Federation surveys had reported no signs of previous civilization in the system. When they submitted their findings to the colonial administration, they were told that their data was inconclusive and that they should focus on more immediate concerns. The first settlement on Kepler 442f was home to nearly 400,000 colonists. Within 3 months of its establishment, the planet's surface was harsh but manageable, with vast plains suitable for agriculture and mountain ranges rich in useful minerals. The colonists worked with a determination that had made humanity respected throughout the galaxy, building cities and infrastructure with impressive speed. Colonial Governor Robert Davis oversaw the entire operation from his headquarters on Kepler 442d. He was a veteran administrator who had helped establish successful colonies on a dozen worlds, and he approached this mission with the same methodical planning that had made him successful before. His daughter, Lieutenant Emma Davis, commanded the Colonial Guard units responsible for security across all 5 settlements. Neither of them knew that their reports were being carefully monitored by beings that had been watching the system for months. In the dark spaces beyond the furthest planet, creatures that had not been seen in this part of the galaxy for 50 years began to stir. The Kethmori were unlike anything else in known space. They stood 8 feet tall, on powerful legs that ended in razor-sharp claws, their bodies covered in chitinous armor that could deflect most energy weapons. Their faces were nightmarish combinations of insect and predator, with compound eyes that could see across multiple spectrums and mandibles that could crush metal. They traveled in bioorganic ships that seemed to grow rather than be built, vessels that pulsed with unnatural life and adapted to threats in real time. The first scout ships emerged from dark space 3 weeks ahead of the schedule that Federation intelligence had predicted. They moved through the outer system like shadows, observing the human settlements with the patient attention of predators studying prey. The Kethmori had learned much about warfare during their centuries of conquest, and they understood the value of timing and surprise. Captain Mitchell's UHS Defiance was patrolling the outer reaches of the system when the first distress signal came through. Communications Officer Lieutenant Sarah Brooks had been monitoring routine transmissions from the colonies when the signal from Kepler 442f cut through the peaceful chatter like a scream. "This is Colony 7 on Kepler 442f, the voice crackled through the static. "We are under attack. Unknown vessels are landing in the southern district. They are not responding to our communications. We need immediate assistance." Mitchell felt his stomach drop as he recognized the panic in the colonist's voice. "Set course for Kepler 442F, maximum speed," he ordered. "Send a priority message to Federation Command. We have a situation." The scene that greeted them when they arrived at the colony was like something from humanity's worst nightmares. The Kethmori had landed their bioships directly in the middle of the settlement, disgorging hundreds of their warriors into the streets. The creatures moved with terrifying efficiency, herding groups of colonists into containment areas, while systematically destroying any resistance. What horrified Mitchell's crew most was that the Kethmori were not simply killing everyone they encountered. They were sorting the colonists, taking some alive and dragging them toward their ships while slaughtering others where they stood. The purpose was unclear, but the systematic nature of the selection process suggested something far worse than simple conquest. Lieutenant Brooks recorded everything as the Defiance approached the planet. Her hands shook as she transmitted the data to Federation Command, knowing that what she was witnessing would change everything. The peaceful colonists who had come to build new lives were being harvested like crops, their screams audible even through the ship's sensors. The Kethmori fleet numbered in the thousands, more than any Federation intelligence report had suggested possible. They spread through the system like a plague, their bioships moving with purpose and coordination that spoke of a hive mind directing their actions. The human colonies, equipped with only basic defensive systems designed to handle pirates and natural disasters, were completely overwhelmed. On Kepler 442d, Colonial Governor Davis received reports of the attack on the outer colony with growing horror. He immediately activated the emergency protocols, sending warnings to all settlements and ordering the Colonial Guard to prepare defensive positions. His daughter Emma coordinated the evacuation of non-essential personnel while organizing the few military units they had available. The Kethmori assault on the second colony began 12 hours later. This time, the colonists were better prepared, but their preparation meant little against an enemy that had perfected the art of conquest over millennia. The creatures attacked from multiple directions simultaneously, their bioships providing air support, while ground forces moved through the settlement with mechanical precision. Admiral Hayes received the first reports of the attack. While she was reviewing fleet dispositions in her command center, the images from the colonies showed scenes of devastation that reminded her of the worst battles in human history. Entire city blocks were burning, and the emergency transmissions painted a picture of systematic extermination. She immediately contacted Federation Command, requesting permission to deploy the full human fleet to support the colonies. The response came back within minutes, signed by the Veltar High Command themselves. The human fleet was ordered to maintain defensive positions around the inner system. Under no circumstances were they to engage the Kethmori or attempt rescue operations. The reasoning was coldly logical. The Kethmori had to be stopped before they could reach the valuable inner worlds where the major species had their mining operations. The human colonies were serving their intended purpose as early warning systems and speed bumps, buying time for the real defenses to be prepared. Admiral Hayes stared at the orders in disbelief. The Federation was abandoning over 2 million human colonists to die, and they expected her to help them do it. For the first time in her career, she began to question whether the oath she had sworn to the Federation was worth the lives of her own people. On the surface of Kepler 442d, Governor Davis made his final transmission to Earth. The Kethmori had overrun the outer defenses and were closing in on the government complex. His daughter Emma was leading the last organized resistance, buying time for the few remaining transports to escape with what survivors they could carry. "This is Governor Davis of Kepler 442d. He spoke into the communicator as explosions shook the building around him. "The colony is lost. The Kethmori are unlike anything we were prepared for. They are not just conquering us, they are harvesting us. Tell Earth that we tried to build something beautiful here, but we were sent to die. Tell them that we will not be forgotten." The transmission ended in static as the Keth Mori reached the command center. Governor Davis died with a weapon in his hand, buying his daughter and the remaining colonists a few more precious minutes to escape. Emma Davis would be one of the few survivors to witness what humanity became when they realized they had been betrayed by the very people they had trusted to protect them. The abandoned colonies of Kepler 442 had become a nightmare landscape where over 2 million human colonists faced extinction. The Keth Mori had established massive hive clusters on the outer planets, their bioorganic structures spreading across the surface like cancerous growths. Within these structures, the most horrifying discovery awaited those few humans who survived the initial assault. Former Marine Sergeant Danny Williams crouched in the ruins of what had once been a thriving shopping district on Kepler 442d. Around him, a small group of survivors moved through the rubble with the careful silence of people who had learned that noise meant death. They had been fighting a guerrilla war against the Keth Mori for weeks now, striking at isolated patrols and trying to rescue other survivors from the hive clusters. What they found in those alien structures would haunt them forever. The Keth Mori were not simply conquering the human colonies, they were using them as breeding grounds. The colonists who had been taken alive were being kept in organic pods, their bodies serving as hosts for Keth Mori larvae. The process was slow and agonizing, designed to keep the hosts alive for as long as possible, while the alien young developed inside them. Helen Martinez had been a school teacher before the invasion, a gentle woman who had come to Kepler 442 to educate the children of pioneers. Now she found herself leading a group of survivors through the underground tunnels beneath the colony. Her teaching skills adapted to the grim task of showing people how to kill without being killed. The transformation was painful but necessary, as the soft life of the colonies had not prepared them for the reality of warfare. The scattered resistance groups communicated through hidden transmitters, sharing information about Keth Mori movements and coordinating attacks. They had learned that the creatures operated in predictable patterns, following the commands of larger queen forms that directed their actions. By studying these patterns, the humans had managed to save thousands of colonists from the breeding pods, though the cost in lives was enormous. Meanwhile, Admiral Hayes stood in her command center aboard the Federation flagship, watching the real-time reports from the Kepler 442 system with growing anguish. The Federation Council had ordered her to maintain the defensive perimeter around the inner worlds, forbidding any rescue attempts for the stranded colonists. The official statement praised the colonists' heroic sacrifice for galactic security, while making it clear that no help would be coming. The other Federation species had retreated to safe distances, their fleets positioned to protect the valuable mining operations on the inner planets. The Veltar commanders spoke of the human colonies as successful shields, noting how they had slowed the Keth Mori advance and provided valuable intelligence about enemy tactics. The fact that millions of people were dying in the process was considered an acceptable cost for the greater good. Captain Michel's UHS Defiance remained in the outer system, officially on patrol, but actually monitoring the situation in the abandoned colonies. His crew had been deeply affected by what they had witnessed, and many of them had family or friends among the colonists. Chief Engineer Maria Santos had lost her sister in the first attack, while Navigator Alex Carter's brother was among the missing on Kepler-442f. The breaking point came when communications specialist Lisa Parker intercepted a heavily encrypted transmission between Veltar Command and their forward observers. The message was in an ancient dialect that most Federation species had forgotten, but Parker had studied xenolinguistics at the Academy and recognized enough words to understand them all, meaning. The transmission revealed that the Galactic Council had been monitoring the Kethmori advance for months before the colonies were established. They had deliberately timed the colonization to coincide with the expected invasion, using detailed intelligence about Kethmori behavior patterns to predict when and where they would strike. The human settlements had never been intended to succeed as colonies. They were bait designed to draw the Kethmori into a trap. Even more shocking was the revelation that the Federation had been conducting experiments on captured Kethmori specimens for decades, studying their biology and behavior to develop better strategies for containing them. The entire colonization of Kepler 442 was part of a larger research project, with the colonists serving as unwitting test subjects in a massive behavioral study. When Parker brought the translation to Captain Mitchell, he felt something break inside him. The Federation they had served faithfully for generations had treated humanity like laboratory animals, sending them to die for the advancement of alien science. The betrayal was so complete and callous that it defied comprehension. Mitchell immediately transmitted the information to Admiral Hayes, who received it in her private quarters, where she could react without being observed by Federation monitors. The Admiral had suspected that something was wrong with the mission from the beginning, but she had never imagined the depth of the betrayal. Her own people were being sacrificed, not for galactic security, but for the curiosity of species that saw them as expendable test subjects. The final straw came when Governor Davis's daughter Emma, now leading one of the largest resistance groups, managed to establish contact with the Federation fleet. Her transmission was broadcast on all channels, ensuring that every human in the system would hear her words. "This is Lieutenant Emma Davis of the Colonial Guard," her voice crackled through, the static, exhaustion, and pain clear in every word. "We know you are out there, watching us die. We know that you have orders to abandon us, but we are not asking for your help anymore. We are telling you what happened here, so that humanity will know the truth." She went on to describe the horrors of the Kethmori breeding program, the systematic harvesting of colonists, and the desperate fight for survival that had consumed the last weeks of their lives. Her words painted a picture of suffering and courage that moved even the hardened veterans of the Federation military. "The Federation sent us here to die," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "They told us we were pioneers, but we were really just bait. They watched us build our homes and raise our children, knowing that we would all be slaughtered. But we want you to know that we did not die as victims. We died as humans, fighting for each other and refusing to surrender even when hope was gone." The transmission ended with the sound of weapons fire and Emma's voice shouting orders to her troops. It was the last communication received from the Kepler 442 system. Admiral Hayes stood in her command center, surrounded by officers who had heard the transmission with tears in their eyes. The betrayal was complete, and the choice before them was simple. They could continue to follow orders from a Federation that saw them as expendable tools, or they could remember what it meant to be human. The Admiral looked around at her crew, seeing the same anger and determination in their faces that she felt in her own heart. These were people who had given their lives to the Federation, who had believed in the ideals of galactic cooperation and mutual protection. They had been betrayed by the very people they had sworn to serve. "Communications," Admiral Hayes said, quietly, her voice carrying across the silent bridge. "Open a channel to all human vessels in the system." The channel opened, and Hayes could feel the weight of history in the words she was about to speak. Everything that followed would depend on what humanity chose to do in this moment, when they realized that their friends had become their enemies. "As Admiral Hayes of the Federation Navy," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do, "I have served the Federation for 30 years, believing that we were part of something greater than ourselves. Today, I learned that we were wrong. The Federation has betrayed us, used us, and abandoned us when we needed them most." She paused, gathering her thoughts for the words that would change everything. I am ordering all human vessels to prepare for immediate departure to the Kepler 442 system. We are going to bring our people home, regardless of Federation orders. Any ship that wishes to remain with the Federation may do so, but I will not abandon human lives to protect alien interests. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every human ship in the system acknowledged the order, their crews eager to finally do something that mattered. The Federation commanders watched in shock as their most reliable allies prepared to commit what could only be considered an act of treason. Admiral Haas looked at the tactical display showing the positions of the human fleet, and she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in her career, she was doing something that felt completely right. Humanity was going to save itself, and the galaxy would never be the same. The moment humanity broke was not when they were betrayed, but when they chose to break free from those who had betrayed them. The rescue mission was about to begin, and with it, the transformation of a species that had finally learned to value themselves as much as others valued them. The rescue mission began with Captain Mitchell's UHS Defiance, leading a fleet of 12 human vessels into the heart of the Kepler 442 system. The ships moved in formation through space that was thick with Kethmori biovessels, their hulls gleaming with purpose as they approached certain doom. The human crews knew they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, but desperation had awakened something primal in their hearts that made victory seem possible despite the odds. Chief Engineer Maria Santos worked miracles in the engine room of the Defiance, pushing the ship's systems far beyond their designed limits. She had lost her sister in the first Kethmori attack, and her grief had transformed into a cold determination to save every life she could. Around her, her engineering team stripped non-essential systems to feed more power to the weapons and shields, turning their exploration vessel into a weapon of war. Navigator Alex Carter plotted impossible courses through asteroid fields and enemy formations, his fingers dancing across the controls with the precision of a master pianist. His brother was somewhere down on Kepler 442F, probably dead, but possibly still alive in one of the Kethmori breeding pods. The thought of his brother's suffering drove him to push the ship through maneuvers that should have torn it apart, but somehow the Defiance held together. The transformation was not limited to the Defiance. Across the human fleet, similar changes were taking place as ordinary people adapted to extraordinary circumstances. Dr. Lisa Brown, who had spent her career healing people, found herself jury-rigging weapon systems with her knowledge of alien biology. She used her understanding of Kethmori physiology to create targeted toxins that could be delivered through modified medical darts. The Federation fleets watched from their safe positions around the inner planets as humanity entered what could only be described as a berserker rage. The Veltar observers took careful notes on the changes in human behavior, noting with clinical interest how the species shifted from cooperative to aggressive when threatened with extinction. They had seen this pattern in other species before, but never with such intensity. The first engagement came when the human fleet encountered a Kethmori patrol group near the outer asteroid belt. The alien bioships moved like living creatures, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as both communication and weapon targeting systems. Under normal circumstances, the human vessels would have been destroyed in minutes by the superior alien technology, but these were not normal circumstances. The human ships fought with a ferocity that surprised even their own crews. Captain Mitchell ordered ramming attacks against enemy vessels, using the Defiance's armored hull as a weapon when conventional arms failed. Other ships followed his example, turning the space battle into a brutal melee where survival mattered more than tactics. The Kethmori had conquered dozens of species over the millennia, but they had never faced an enemy that fought with such desperate courage. Their bioships were designed for efficiency and overwhelming force, not for the chaotic close-quarters combat that the humans forced upon them. For the first time in their recent memory, the Kethmori began to take significant casualties. On the planet's surface, the trapped colonists witnessed something unprecedented. Human ships were diving through swarms of Kethmori biovessels, their hulls streaming plasma and debris as they fought their way toward the surface. The sight ignited a renewed resistance among the survivors, who had been slowly losing hope. As the days passed without rescue, Sergeant Danny Williams received the news of the approaching fleet while he was planning another raid on a Kethmori breeding facility. The information spread through the resistance network like wildfire, and suddenly the guerrilla fighters who had been barely surviving were transformed into an army with purpose. They began coordinating with the incoming ships, providing targeting, data, and preparing landing zones for rescue operations. Helen Martinez, the former teacher turned resistance leader, organized massive evacuation efforts as the human fleet approached. Her people moved through the ruins of the colonies with renewed energy, gathering survivors and guiding them toward designated pickup points. The work was dangerous, as the Kethmori responded to the threat by increasing their patrols and hunting. Down resistance cells with renewed vigor, the space battle raged for hours as the human fleet carved its way through the Kethmori formations. Ships on both sides were destroyed in the carnage, but the humans pressed forward with single-minded determination. They had come to save their people, and nothing would stop them from completing that mission. Captain Mitchell's UHS Defiance was badly damaged in the fighting, its hull cracked and its engines failing. But Mitchell refused to retreat, knowing that every minute of delay meant more colonists would die in the alien breeding pods. When his weapons failed, he used the ship's emergency thrusters to ram a Kethmori biovessel, creating a gap in their formation that allowed other human ships to break through. The rescue operations on the surface were chaotic and desperate. Human Marines landed in the middle of active combat zones, fighting their way through Kethmori defenders to reach the breeding facilities. What they found inside those structures would haunt them for the rest of their lives, but they pressed on with the grim task of cutting their people free from the alien pods. Dr. Brown worked tirelessly in the makeshift medical stations, treating colonists who had been rescued from the breeding pods. Many of them were in critical condition, their bodies ravaged by the alien parasites that had been growing inside them. She developed emergency surgical procedures to remove the larvae, saving thousands of lives but losing many others to the advanced stages of infestation. The Federation commanders watched the rescue operation with growing alarm. The humans were not following any recognized tactical doctrine, instead fighting with an intensity that bordered on insanity. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting, their crews pushing damaged systems beyond all reasonable limits. It was as if the threat of extinction had unlocked something fundamental in human nature. The Kethmori, for their part, began to adapt their tactics to counter the human berserker attacks. They started using their bioships in coordinated swarms, overwhelming individual human vessels with sheer numbers. The strategy was effective, but it came at a cost in alien lives that the Kethmori had not expected to pay. As the battle continued, Captain Mitchell made the decision that would define the entire rescue operation. His ship's engines were failing, and he knew that the Defiance would not survive another engagement. But there was still one thing he could do to help the evacuation efforts succeed. The largest Kethmori hive ship hung in orbit above Kepler 442d, coordinating the alien response to the human attack. If it could be destroyed, the remaining Kethmori forces would be thrown into confusion, buying precious time for the rescue ships to complete their mission. Mitchell ordered his crew to evacuate to the other ships, but many of them refused to leave. Chief Engineer Santos stayed at her post, determined to keep the engines running for as long as possible. Navigator Carter remained at his station, plotting the final course that would take them to their target. Dr. Brown worked frantically to transfer the rescued colonists to other vessels, saving as many as she could before the end. The UHS Defiance made its final run toward the hive ship, its hull glowing with heat from the damaged engines. The Kethmori threw everything they had at the approaching vessel, but it was too late to stop what was happening. The ship struck the hive ship's biohull with tremendous force, the resulting explosion tearing a massive hole in the alien vessel's structure. The destruction of the hive ship threw the Kethmori forces into chaos, just as Mitchell had hoped. The remaining human ships used the confusion to complete their evacuation operations, loading the last of the survivors and fighting their way back toward Federation space. The rescue mission had succeeded, but at a terrible cost in lives and ship's dot as the human fleet limped away from the Kepler 442 system. They carried with them nearly 800,000 survivors, less than half the original colonial population, but far more than anyone had thought possible. The ships were overcrowded and damaged, but they were alive and free. More importantly, they carried with them the knowledge of what humanity was capable of when pushed to its limits. The rescue at Kepler 442 had changed everything. The species that had once begged for acceptance in the galactic community had proven that they would fight to the death to protect their own people. The Federation would soon learn that their loyal servants had become something far more dangerous, humans who no longer trusted their allies and were willing to do anything to survive. The returning human fleet refused to report to Federation command when they reached the outer edge of civilized space. Instead, Admiral Hayes ordered her ships to broadcast a message to every human world simultaneously, revealing the truth about the Kepler 442 betrayal. The recording of the intercepted Veltar transmission spread across human space like wildfire, igniting a revolution that the Federation had never anticipated. The message reached Earth during the morning news cycle, interrupting regular programming. With footage from the rescue mission and the horrific scenes inside the Kethmori breeding facilities, citizens across the planet watched in stunned silence as they learned that their government had knowingly sent millions of colonists to die for an alien experiment. The images of human survivors being cut free from organic pods filled screens. In every home, office, and public space. President William Jackson found himself facing the largest protests in human history within hours of the broadcast. Millions of people filled the streets of every major city, demanding answers and justice for the Kepler 442 massacre. The gentle species that had once sought acceptance in the galactic community now spoke with one unified voice of rage and betrayal. Protesters were not just angry about the loss of life, though that was certainly part of it. They were furious about the lies they had been told, the way their trust had been manipulated, and the casual dismissal of human lives by species they had considered allies. Signs reading "Never Again" and "Humanity First" appeared at every demonstration, while Federation flags were burned in the streets. Jackson tried to address the nation from his office, but his words fell on deaf ears. The people had heard Admiral Hayes speak with the authority of someone who had witnessed the betrayal firsthand, and they trusted her more than they trusted their own government. When Jackson attempted to defend the Federation's actions as necessary for galactic security, the crowd outside the presidential palace began chanting for his resignation. The transformation was not limited to Earth. On every human colony world, similar scenes played out as populations that had been scattered across dozens of systems found themselves united by a common purpose. The Mars colonies shut down their Federation trade agreements and began preparing for economic independence. The mining worlds of the outer systems started hoarding strategic resources instead of shipping them to Federation partners. Admiral Hayes, now calling herself commander of the Human Liberation Fleet, established a temporary headquarters on the moon base at Luna Station. From there, she began coordinating what could only be described as humanity's complete withdrawal from galactic civilization. The species that had once been eager to please their alien allies now focused entirely on protecting and advancing their own interests. The Galactic Council, composed of species who had never experienced true existential threat, failed to understand the magnitude of what they had unleashed. They called emergency sessions to discuss the human problem and offered meaningless apologies for the regrettable loss of life at Kepler 442. The Veltar counselor suggested that reforms could be implemented to prevent similar incidents in the future. The Zephyrian representative proposed economic incentives to encourage human cooperation, believing that trade agreements and technology transfers would be enough to restore the previous relationship. Other council members agreed, convinced that humanity's emotional response would fade once they realized their dependence on Federation resources and protection. They were catastrophically wrong. The response from the newly formed human coalition was swift and decisive. Emma Davis, the survivor of Kepler 442, who had become a symbol of human resistance, delivered their answer to the Federation's peace overtures during a broadcast that reached every corner of known space. "The Federation offers us reforms and incentives," she said, her voice carrying the weight of all the suffering she had witnessed. "They promise to treat us better in the future, as if we were children who had been scolded for misbehaving. But we are not children, and we will not be treated as disposable tools ever again." The economic sanctions that followed were designed to force humanity back into compliance, but they had the opposite effect. Human worlds that had been dependent on Federation trade networks began developing their own alternatives. The species that had survived ice ages and world wars by adapting to impossible circumstances adapted once again, this time to complete. INDEPENDENCE, Dr. Amanda Foster, one of the Kepler 442 survivors who had documented the early signs of Keth Mori presence, found herself leading a crash program to reverse engineer captured alien technology. Her team worked with a desperation born of necessity, knowing that humanity's survival depended on their ability to match or exceed Federation capabilities. What they discovered changed everything. Human intuition and creativity, traits that the Federation had always considered primitive, allowed them to innovate with alien technology in ways that the methodical Federation species could not match. Within months, human ships began appearing with capabilities that should not have existed according to established galactic science. The breakthrough came when Foster's team successfully merged human-computer technology with Keth Mori bioorganic systems. The result was a hybrid technology that could think and adapt in real time, creating weapons and defenses that evolved to meet each new threat. The Federation's predictable tactics became useless against opponents who could learn and counter. Their strategies instantly. The first test of humanity's new capabilities came when the Veltar fleet attempted to pacify the Sol system. The aliens expected to face the same cooperative humans they had dominated for centuries, but they encountered something entirely different. The defensive systems that protected Earth and its colonies were unlike anything in their experience. Battle was brief and decisive. Human ships moved with impossible coordination, their weapons adapting to Veltar countermeasures faster than the aliens could respond. The bioorganic components of their technology seemed to anticipate enemy actions, creating a level of tactical awareness that bordered on precognition. The Veltar fleet retreated with half their ships destroyed, their survivors traumatized by encounters with weapons that seemed to think and learn. The reports they brought back to the Federation described technology that violated every principle of known science, ships that grew stronger during combat, and crews that fought with inhuman determination. The Federation's response was predictable, but ineffective. They imposed a complete embargo on human space, hoping to starve the rebellious species into submission. They mobilized their combined fleets for a massive assault that would crush human resistance once and for all. What they found instead was a species that had learned to thrive in isolation and had developed capabilities that matched their own. The final confrontation took place, not in space, but in the ruins of the Veltar Council Chamber on Zentara Prime. Human forces, led by survivors of Kepler 442, had fought their way through the Federation's defenses and occupied the capital world. The sight of human soldiers in the sacred halls of galactic government sent shockwaves through civilized space. General Danny Williams, the former Marine sergeant who had led the resistance on Kepler 442, stood before the cowering council members with the same quiet determination that had carried him through the darkest days of the siege. Beside him, Helen Martinez served as humanity's first ambassador to the galaxy, her teaching background helping her find the words to express what her species had become. "You wanted to know what humanity is capable of," she said, her voice echoing. "In the vast chamber. You sent us to die to satisfy your curiosity, and we survived. You tried to break us, and we became stronger. You sought to use us, and we learned to use ourselves." The Veltar counselor, his race's arrogance finally shattered, asked what humanity wanted from the galaxy. The question revealed how little he understood about what had happened. Humanity no longer wanted anything from the Federation except to be left alone to chart their own course among the stars. Admiral Hayes, her uniform now bearing the insignia of the Human Coalition, provided the answer that would be remembered for millennia. "We want what every species in this galaxy should have demanded long ago," she said. "The right to exist on our own terms, to protect our own people, and to never again bow to those who see us as expendable. You tried to break us, but instead you broke something in yourselves. You forgot that the most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing left to lose." The treaty that followed established humanity as an independent galactic power, free from Federation control, and recognized as equals by all member species. The reparations for Kepler 442 were substantial, but they paled in comparison to the real victory. Humanity had learned to value itself as much as others had undervalued them. The transformation was complete. The species that had once begged for acceptance had become teachers, showing the galaxy what it meant to fight for principles rather than profit. The memorial on Luna bore a simple inscription that captured the essence of what had happened. "To those who died at Kepler 442, and to those who lived to remember their sacrifice, taught us that survival is not enough. We must be free." 50 years later, the Human Coalition stood as one of the galaxy's major powers. Their technology and military doctrine, studied by SP,